It's time for Talking Pictures Trivia. A quick friendly reminder, drinking more water can make you feel a lot better.
Welcome to Talking Pictures Trivia, the podcast in which a group of geographically challenged friends explore movies through trivia as an excuse to keep their friendships alive. I'm one of these friends and today's host, Nick, and with me is...
Tom.
And KJ.
All right, great to have you back as always. Additionally, joining us as a guest for this episode is...
Ben.
Thanks for joining us, Ben. Ben hosts the Three Films and a Podcast, which also consists of geographically challenged co-hosts exploring movies. Ben joined us for our World of Apu episode, and Tom was on Three Films and a Podcast for their Apu trilogy episode. Check those out. Ben also conveniently likes movies. For those joining us for the first time, we start off each episode with a movie quiz, as these pivotal questions will determine who earns today's trivia crown. Questions in the first round will be worth 1 point, and questions in the second round will be worth 2 points. Then we followed up with our famous movie rant where anything goes. KJ, tell us about today's movie.
Today we are going back to 2016 in Japan to conclude our summer blockbuster movie block. Rikishi wins his first sumo in over a decade, Pico Taro releases his PPAP music video, and Pokemon Go is released in Japan. During all this, Hideaki Anno and Shinji Higuchi's movie, Shin Godzilla, was released. Shin, in Japanese, can mean new, and this movie was a reaction, or even kind of inspired, from the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear disaster in 2011, caused by the Tohoku earthquake and tsunami. Other big movies in Japan in 2016 include Star Wars: The Force Awakens, One Piece film, Gold, Your Name, and Detective Conan, The Darkest Nightmare. Shin Godzilla follows bureaucrats as they desperately try to decide who has the authority to deal with the giant monster that has risen from Tokyo Bay. We follow various politicians and researchers as they try to determine the best way to deal with Godzilla. Weapons seem ineffective, and in the end, they need to use the literal city of Tokyo and the people who build cities to defeat the monster before the true enemy, the rest of the world, attempt to blow up Tokyo with nukes. Nick, if you only had one word to describe Shin Godzilla, what would it be?
Bureaucracy. Tom?
Governance. Ben.
Consequence.
And my word would be... It's time for question 1. What does Kyoko Ann Patterson request after she shows the multicolored maps to the geeks, nerds, and weirdos?
Locked in?
Locked in.
I'll lock in.
Nice. Tom, what do you have?
I have Intel from the United States. I think Intel from the United States.
And Nick?
She wanted to have an equal exchange of information between Japan and the United States. She actually represented the U.S., and she wanted to make sure that Japan was going to have open communication with anything that was uncovered on either end.
And Ben?
I completely forgot, so I thought maybe it was food for everybody because I could not remember what she requested. So
that might have been in there too.
That might also have been there.
Who
Yeah.
knows?
Yeah.
All right, no points on the first question.
Oh.
She puts the maps down. All the weirdos, as they describe them, the geeks and the nerds, are all excited. They're looking at it, and she goes, "By the way, can we use informal Japanese? My formal Japanese is terrible." And it's this wonderful inflection point where we lose, or not really, but we lose a lot of the formal. And now we're at the informal, right? The informal is going to figure this out because the formal couldn't handle it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's where the word bureaucracy comes from.
Yeah.
When they make a single decision, you see the chain of command that it has to go through. I mean, it's insane. And it even intensifies later in the film with, this might not be within the first 30 minutes, KJ, but when they ordered the first live firing on Godzilla, there's about 10 people that goes through, and I might be underestimating. So I think they set up the understanding of how everything is very formalized and there's a process for every single thing.
and apparently a room for everything too, because they move one meeting from one room to another. And honestly, that's also to follow your lead where my consequence came from, because we have all these meetings, and by the time they like address the press and say like Godzilla will not come ashore, we smash cut to Godzilla ashore. You know, it's because like they've taken so long through all these formalities and everything. So I think that was a great moment in there where she's just like, can we just like, you know, break it down a little bit and just like have a discussion here and stop with all the formality, because it'll be faster for us to figure it out if we can just do it on our own.
Do you also think that was more of her US influence too, though? Like, let's just figure it out.
I feel like her US influence was minimal at best. That was honestly part of the hardest part of the movie for me, was believing that she was American citizen at all.
Yeah,
you know? So like that would have been her American influence for sure. Like, can we just stop with all the formality? But that was about it. That was difficult for me. But yeah, I would say that's probably her American influence.
Yeah, I think that, well, there's a lot there. I mean, the idea of a bureaucracy, when we think of them, and there's different arguments as to where they arise from. There's like the John Stuart Mill, where it's like it's a royalist thing, the royals appoint these people. But the kind of more famous one was an essay by Max Weber in the early part of the 20th century, who talked about bureaucracy as these kind of highly rationalistic systems in which we can import expertise and people with that expertise into a system that kind of generates almost machine-like an outcome or product. Now, what Weber also says in that essay is that eventually, when something becomes so highly rational that it cannot change, then it becomes the iron cage in which you're trapped. And then he actually uses that phrase, iron cage. And that seems to be what's happening here, right? Is that there's this incredibly rationalistic system that is also predicated upon hierarchy, and age seems to be a marked important thing in these hierarchies, in these committees. And it's also every time there is a decision that needs to be made, it stimulates a system. It stimulates a machine in the factory that needs to actually produce a decision. However, when you're in uncharted territories, like a evolving radioactive monster appears, you know, now this has become the trap. The system that is governance has become the trap out of which you can get to make a decision. And there's one interesting thing to talk about our female lead's Americanism or Americanness, even though she's not really convincing as an American, because she doesn't, the actress can't really master an American accent. There is one point where they're talking to the PM. One of the secretaries is talking to the PM of Japan, and it's not even the PM, it's like the assistant deputy secretary or something, you know, it's one of these infinite positions. And they're like, oh yeah, it's Americans have a different way of doing things. You know, it's not based on age, it's based on accomplishment or something like that. And so you could see there already this kind of idea of bureaucracy is also being kind of culturally prescribed, and seeing Americans and the informality that the female lead brings to the movie as being something outside of the hierarchies that allow bureaucracy to function.
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head, Tom, right? The bureaucracies are there because of safeties, and we wanted to make sure we considered everything, and we've done things before and things slipped away from us, so now we have all these rules in place to make sure things go well and swimmingly, but it slows you down. You can't react. How do you deal with something that's unprecedented, that's never been before, that is a threat and is harming people, right? And that's where it fails, according to Anakin Skywalker anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, isn't there even a part in here where they're talking about like, we don't even know like who's responsible for this? Yeah, like what arm this falls under in the military or whatever, you know, it's like, we don't know who's responsible. It's like, this is, everybody's responsible at this point, but like, yeah, they have so many things set in place that it just causes more problems.
It's Article 76, right? Article 76 is where they try to do the military action, the defensive military action, but they can't, because it has to be a military threat that is directed towards them. It can't just be something incidental. And so they can't do that. And the shot is from the actual text. It's like looking through the text up at you know, the military people. So it's almost like the text, the letter of the law, not the spirit, is now dominating this system.
There was also something where they couldn't ask for foreign assistance from their U.S. treaty until they took a first action. So there was even in the early onset there of trying to get other help, they're like, oh, well, actually, we still got to follow these rules before we can ask for help. So we got to go pew, 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 and then ask for help versus just asking for help.
Yeah.
To keep the Star Wars theme, we've got to Han Solo and take the first shot, and then they'll come in and help us out.
McClunky.
We got to McClunky this.
It's time for question 2. What is the Yaguchi plan?
Locked in.
Locked in.
Locked in.
All right, Ben, what do you have?
I mean, essentially to freeze the monster, if I remember correctly. That was Yaguchi's plan, was to freeze him.
And Tom?
I had the same thing. I thought there was a change. I thought at one point they said, okay, we have to stop the Yaguchi plan to do the freeze thing. But I thought I locked in that they were going to kind of research the animal's biology and use that to defeat it via freezing it to what, negative 197, something like that.
And Nick?
So it wasn't the one with the freezing, because that was named after some kind of sake or something like that. I'm going to say that the Yaguchi plan was the first one where they decided to just shoot it with a lot of stuff, and hopefully that would take care of it.
All right, points for Ben and Tom. So the Yaguchi plan was actually not freezing. It was actually heating up the monster. All right, you guys ready for this? So the idea is Godzilla's radioactive. Therefore, he must have something like a nuclear power plant in him. Mm-hmm. So if we coagulate his blood and stop the cooling circulation system, he will heat up so much that he will have to scram, which is when they drop the rods into the nuclear power plant to stop all power, and then he'll freeze because now there's no nuclear power to go. So ultimately, yes, it was to freeze him, but the plan was to heat him up to cause himself to freeze himself. So I thought that was kind of a cool direct correlation to a nuclear power plant, right? I mean, that's what this movie is a lot about, is how do you deal with a nuclear disaster, right? Part of what Godzilla is he is a radiation nuclear disaster. But I want to talk about Godzilla. What did you guys think about the monster?
I love the monster. Eventually, I will say it took me a bit. Like the first version we get, that's like on his belly going through the streets. I was like, what is this? Like,
grotesque.
Those big, huge eyes and stuff.
Yeah,
it's
like that was
man. This is like, if this is all it's going to be, this is not what I was expecting at all. You know, again, like, especially I was like UK, like I saw the poster, I was like, oh, this looks cool. And that was not what we saw, like just squirming around on the streets there. But I think, that did a great visual job of representing, all the floods and stuff that had happened. And so it made sense why they did that. But when I first saw him, especially when all the blood falls out, we're on the side and that all comes, I'm like, man, what is this going to be? But then watching it like evolve and develop and stuff, like I thought how it ended up was great. Like the final monster that we get was so cool.
The movie has this odd lingering camera work on the monster. Like, the camera occasionally will stop and just kind of look up at it, especially at its tail, and just kind of dwell on it. It's really kind of odd and interesting. But I agree with you, Ben. Like when the first monster came ashore, the first iteration of Godzilla, it was sort of, oh, this looks kind of awkward and weird. Just for our audience, it looks like a fish, and I think it is kind of. It's operating like a fish. It has big gills.
Blood's coming out of its gills.
And or whatever's coming out of its gills. Its eyes don't close.
Yeah.
And
bug eyes too.
Yeah. These big, like, they look like fish eyes. And they don't close, and like it doesn't seem to have a lot of control over its head. So the head just sort of whips back and forth. I mean, it's really grotesque, and it's also not that great.
Literally a fish out of water,
Yeah,
I mean, now what I thought was, what the heck has KJ got us into now? I mean, that's really what I thought when I saw it, the first iteration of Godzilla. For me, I mean, I embraced it, but he was grotesque and he was off-putting, yet at the same time endearing at the end. So it's a lot of emotions involved with the portrayal of Godzilla here. Definitely something different.
Yeah, it's funny actually. Toho, the guys who made the original Godzillas and a bunch of Godzilla movies, and even this one, they have a rule about Godzilla, which is Godzilla must be a creature. It cannot have any human emotions. It cannot be like it cannot be relatable from humans. So even if the Matthew Broderick, the Bryan Cranston Godzilla movies, Toho requires that Godzilla does not show emotion on his face. He is truly a beast that humans have to deal with.
He kind of shows emotion on his face in Kong versus Godzilla.
They did say they got away with a little bit more in that movie than previous ones. Yeah.
Yeah, I suppose if we're going to talk about what Godzilla is in these movies, with the recent MonsterVerse as an exception, it's always a stand-in. It's always a symbol of some sort of catastrophe, right? Initially, it's the bombs, which it sort of works in that way in this film as well. And in this film, it's obviously the nuclear power disaster that occurred there, and so it's interesting that it kind of works in the same way that the Living Dead trilogy works, where each of the Living Dead trilogies, the zombies become a means of getting into kind of social problem, be it consumerism or racism or militarism or whatever. In this way, it's a sort of means. Godzilla is an access point into social commentary, be it the way a government can mishandle a crisis, or the kind of brutality that can be demonstrated in war, or the buildup after the war, as in the case with the original Godzilla. And so it is interesting to think about how these kind of pop culture items actually inject themselves into serious conversations, and the different means in which they do that. And I'd say that and I'll stop in a second. I'll let other people talk. But the way I'd say that they can do that is they can either go in kind of an alienation Brechtian route, which they typically don't do, or they can go in sort of more of a kind of melodramatic route. And I don't mean melodramatic as a condemnation, just as a type of genre, as a type of presentation. And if you ever watch or have read any kind of like 19th century melodramas, a lot of them do a lot of social commentary. I mean, we roll our eyes at them today because they're very melodramatic, but they're also invested in that type of commentary. And I think Godzilla, this film, and the one from the 50s are both in that, are kind of skirting that melodramatic line, even though I think this one's a little smarter.
I mean, yeah, I like that thought process that they have behind that as well, because I think the character works best when the people have to unite against them, against one specific thing. Whereas, some of the whatever 20 plus B movies they've done, where it's like two big things fighting each other, and like the citizens are just like, I don't know, the consequence of what's happening here. They have to deal with the destruction stuff. But in these movies, like in the original and this one, they kind of have to unite together. So I think it's great that, that you just always want it to be a monster and not necessarily something you want to have any compassion for or anything like that.
Along those lines, this movie is, in my mind, actually not really focusing on Godzilla. He may be the catalyst, but this is really a movie about the people of Japan in this crisis, and also the world, but focusing mostly on their interactions with a crisis. So that's what I found fascinating about this. And I said this was even when I talked to my wife, I said, this is a very different movie. I've seen some of the older movies, black and white. This is something completely different. And Godzilla is just really a stand-in for trouble.
Mm-hmm.
It's very weird that this is, for a movie with Godzilla in the title, he's not as big of a role. I don't know how to explain when I say he's not as big of a role in this film, but hopefully somebody could bail me out here.
He's on screen a lot less.
Yeah.
Like literally, he's just on screen a lot less than any other.
And sometimes he's frozen on screen. And sometimes they're like,
yeah.
It's a very interesting way that he was shown throughout the film.
Mm-hmm.
And it would be pretty easy to swap him out for something else and still have
Mhm.
everything else kind of the same.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Just the catalyst.
Yep. After round 1, Tom and Ben are tied at 1. And Nick will get some points next round, I'm sure, because I'm handing
Maybe.
them out. We got time for a quick break, and we'll be back with some more Shin Godzilla.
Black leather tuck shoes look good on an erudite, energetic man indulging the upper-class nightlife. Gold or silver cufflinks shine with sophistication. Silk ties exude class, whether bow or straight. It may not always be the best occasion for tuxedos, but when it is, they look marvelous. But does all this style help you with your vertical jump? Hello, Tom here from Talking Pictures Trivia, and I want to tell you about our new sponsor, Spring-Loaded Formal Wear. Spring-Loaded helps resolve the age-old dilemma. I can either look nice or leap 6 feet straight into the air like a superhero. Spring-loaded tuxedos come equipped with giant springs in the shoes, pants, and jacket so that you can leap up higher than Jerry Rice while dressed like James Bond. Just pick your desired vertical jump and Spring-Loaded does the rest. You can choose between 6 feet, 8 feet, 12 feet, and the new, recently added, 40 feet. No matter the size of the room, you can literally swing from the chandelier. After leaping insanely high using spring-loaded leather loafers and grabbing it while a terrified wedding party screams in confusion. Spring-loaded formal wear. Bounce into the night.
And we're back. Ben, we're at the critical point of our episode where we ask the guests a key question. If you could watch this movie with anyone, dead or alive, who would it be?
I feel like every time I come on, I'm just going to keep naming director masters. You know, I did Scorsese last time, and this time the first person I thought of was Kurosawa, because watching this, it's maybe kind of a stretch to tie the two, but I thought about Yojimbo, where it's like we're focused on, like, there's a central person, but it feels like it's a lot more about the town around them. That's like the real story, you know, like, and I kind of felt this way with Godzilla, where it's like he is the main focus. Obviously, it's in the title and everything, but it's really how everyone around him is dealing with him being there. So I don't know. I mean, anytime you can talk to a film master, I would love to do that, but to kind of cheat and make it a 2-part answer, I would also really love to sit with the creator of Godzilla, who I had to pull up his name, but Tomoyuki Tanaka. And just in the same sense that I would love to take anybody who ran out of that theater on Train Enters a Station, you know, because they freaked out that the train's coming in. And I would just like, I would love them to watch a movie right now and be like, this is probably blowing your mind what's happening right now, you know? And I would just love to know like what he thinks about how the character's been developed, you know, and this was the first one, I believe, that was all CG. I think it looked great, but I'd be kind of curious to hear his take on what they've done with his character.
Yeah, that would be interesting. This is the first remake of that first movie. Before this, there was American ones that took place in either American cities, but this is the first time it's an origin Godzilla story back in Tokyo. So it would be interesting to hear the director's, you know, view on a remake of his movie done in a much more modern way. Right? There's way more characters in this. The solution's actually fairly similar to the first movie.
I feel like they did some nods to the original as well, like, you know, with the destroying the trains and, you know, almost using them in this one as a catalyst, you know, as a weapon, things like that. So that would also be interesting to kind of see what he took away from it, from, you know, what happened in the first Godzilla.
I'd specifically be interested on his take of the mutations, because that was a new element. It's almost their own fault for him developing these different skill sets based on how they tried to deal with him. But I that part specifically, how the different forms were handled, to me, I thought was quite unique.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think it'd be a great conversation.
It's time for question 3. At the end of the movie, who is between Yaguchi and Kayoko-san?
Locked in?
Oh, locked in.
Locked in. Frozen Godzilla.
I had the same thing.
Yeah, same thing when she talks about we just have to learn how to exist with it now. The Frozen Godzilla.
Nice. Points for everybody. Yes, I loved the framing in this movie. And I know we talked about it a little bit before, Tom, you were bringing it up, but the shots of Godzilla walking through a city or walking through a lake or a pond or a river, wherever he was walking, those scenes were gorgeous. The meetings, how boring should it have been to be watching all the meetings? But they used the framing, the blocking, the pacing, the Andy Sorkin style dialogue to drive the movie in a way that made you watch. You had to keep watching. You couldn't stop. I mean, the subtitles also made it kind of rough. But I loved how this movie felt as a movie.
Yeah, I mean, just to speak on the meeting topic, as someone, I edit full time. That's what I do for a living, is edit video. So that stuff really stuck out to me because like, man, this should be boring. This really should, but like the pace that they go with and cutting from one person to another and all that kind of stuff, like it kept you invested the whole time. It was like a meeting was going on where everyone, people are possibly talking over each other, or just like the quick back and forth, and the difference in the kind of cutting from when, it's a formal meeting to when we go informal, and it's a little bit more loose with the camera at that point. But yeah, I thought the composition was great. And that first part, when Godzilla's coming on his belly, just, destroying it. But I remember one shot specifically, and it's split like in the middle where you would think you'd want to focus on Godzilla, but he's to one side, and on the left side, we're just seeing more of the destruction that's coming as a consequence of him coming down. And I thought it was such an interesting shot to frame it that way, because obviously they could frame it any way they want. This isn't actually happening. I'm like, oh, this is really an interesting way to show the destruction, because we can see him, whatever, but then we can also see the other side of this destruction where you think maybe you have buildings that are protecting you, but it's like it's carrying over all over, and we can see it this way.
Yeah, they're very creative with POV too. We get a lot of POV from documents or from inside a computer looking out at the group. There's one time when they get the information about Godzilla is basically going to dissolve, right? That his half-life is whatever it is, 6 months or something. When they pass the computer around that has that information, the camera shoots from inside the computer out at the crowd, and it moves from one character to the other as they take the computer, and then all the other characters sort of make the image around whichever character has taken the computer. And so that was a kind of interesting way of doing it. The camera also, when Godzilla's frozen or is asleep, as he is for an extended period of this movie, which is interesting, right? Godzilla's like resting for most of the picture
with his like tail up too. It's just
Yeah.
like, I wouldn't think that like required energy, but anyway.
Yeah. But like the camera just sort of it treats it like this grand mystery, which I don't know if that's necessarily earned, but it kind of has these shots that are, taken, like I've said before, that are angled upward at the creature, and not from a head-on position either. And it isn't really leaving a lot of mystery. I mean, we see everything Godzilla can do. We can see every part of him, all that type of thing. But there's still this I guess, appreciation for the mystery of what it is. Another thing, this isn't necessarily due to framing, but due to maybe sort of conscientious set design, is if you look in those meetings, you could tell different things about the people in the meetings in spite of the plainness of the rooms they're in. So one example is I think it's the fourth floor of the PM's palace. That's the meeting room before the other meeting room. And his cabinet, they're all in these green plush chairs around a smaller table, and everybody else is in a more rigid chair at a larger table and kind of shouting information at the cabinet. And then the woman with the kind of stern face, who actually recognizes that Godzilla can probably walk on land and we should be aware of that, she's all the way in the corner in a less comfortable chair, away from everyone. And even though this room is like aggressively boring, it's as corporate a thing as you can think of, there's still enough detail here to distinguish hierarchy within that community.
As fun as different meeting rooms are to discuss, I want to go back to Godzilla, the namesake of this film. I don't know how you guys felt about this, but when it came to actually how they portrayed Godzilla, I almost felt like I was watching an older movie with a lower budget. Like they made specific design choices to make him look a bit disturbing and off-putting at times, as well as even the way the laser work went and the fire breathing. We've seen some pretty fancy effects these days, and I imagine this had some kind of budget to it. It felt it was a good feel for the film, but it felt like I was watching a bit of an older Godzilla when it came to what they could do with the monster.
I loved the way the meetings and the non-Godzilla parts felt like a 2016 movie. But as soon as the monster was on the screen, we were transported back to all of his influences, everything throughout the years that had become Godzilla. I really enjoyed how, and this happens a lot in Japan actually, how they can take something very old and something very new and put them next to each other, and it still feels good and right.
That's what really jumped out at me, KJ, with this film. And sometimes that's why I have mixed emotions, because sometimes I was like all on board, and other times I was like, whoa, wait, this is the same universe. But that's why I was really looking forward to talking about this one this week, because it's unique and different, a different portrayal of this monster destroying the city, type theme.
I think the first time I felt like it was a modern day monster is when his jaw unhinges, and like it comes out, like the bottom half like splits open, because that gave me, Stranger Things kind of vibes, whatever. It's like, oh, this is an interesting thing, because everything else leading up to that did feel like a direct throwback to the original, Godzilla, and just some of those older movies as well. But then, yeah, when the atomic, the purple, all that kind of stuff, I'm like, okay, this seems like it would be happening now. But everything else before that did feel dated, but in a direct and deliberate way.
Yeah, it was definitely a stylistic choice, but the ones that you were talking about, the lasers that just like randomly shot like 80s portraits, self-portraits when you're in like elementary school.
Yeah.
Like when you said those random lasers flying around, like that was a choice to make them look
Very
like that.
true.
We could do much better laser work if we wanted to.
Very true.
That's a choice.
It's time for question 4. So this question is going to break the rules of Talking Pictures trivia. We don't have very many rules, but one rule is all questions must be answerable from within the movie. However, this one is not.
Yeah.
So we're going to make it worth double points to compensate,
Oh, hey.
which doesn't really matter, actually. If it's 2 points or 4 points, the results would be the same. But anyway, here's the question. Where is a lot of the soundtrack lifted from?
Locked in.
Yeah, I'll lock in.
I will also lock in.
All right, Tom, what do you have?
I'm gonna say the original Japanese Godzilla.
Nick?
Top Gun.
Godzilla's got the need. The need for speed. Godzilla lost that love. And Ben?
If I remember correctly, I believe the director is the creator of an anime series called Evangelion, something like that. So I think he used some of his soundtrack from that in this movie.
Wow. So points are going to Tom and Ben, because Ben is quite right. With the Evangelion. How do you say it again?
I think Evangelion.
What did
Evangelion
Tom
is.
say?
The original Japanese Godzilla from the 50s.
So yeah, Ben is quite right with the Evangelion link. I was only thinking of the original Godzilla movie, because whenever Godzilla's on screen, they do the Godzilla theme from the original, which I loved that too, because it didn't sound like a modern soundtrack, right? It even sounded like it was recorded on material that just isn't as high quality as material today, right? Everything about it. But as I say, points are going to Tom and Ben, which means we have a tie.
I thought they were in the danger zone,
Sometimes.
I love how you went to love and feel. I'm like, no. Like Top Gun, man. Coming up on a future episode later in this season.
Yeah. And
That's
wait,
one of the best songs from the soundtrack of Top Gun.
what is the
And
song
coolest
again?
scenes too.
Yeah.
I
We've lost that love and
Yeah, but not
feeling was.
Godzilla material. Even if I'm stretching it, like.
That's for Kong versus Godzilla. That's when they fell in love.
So I loved all the callbacks to previous Japanese movies, the previous Godzilla movies. So I just wanted to celebrate that a little bit, if we haven't done so already.
I think that was cool. One thing I heard about on one of the reviews was that even the opening credits, they recreated them like the original ones, like they had them recreated for that, which I thought was cool. And then the roars we hear at the beginning are the same ones from the first Godzilla movie. So the movie really starts out almost an exact copy of the original Godzilla, which I thought was super cool. And then just like using the roar throughout the movie as well, like you said, like having the music, swell and stuff like that. I thought I loved it. I thought it was a great nod. I think it really just kind of shows that he appreciates the original source, which I think really reflects in the movie.
The reason I didn't get these is it's been so long since I've watched the old ones. I mean, I was probably in elementary school because there was a friend when we were in Scouts who was really into these monster films and had them all on VHS. I saw a whole bunch, Rodan, like a whole bunch of different things. Haven't seen any of the old ones. In decades. I can literally say that at this stage of my life.
Yeah, it seems like a reclamation, right, of that property, especially considering, now I think this predates the MonsterVerse, or it's going on at the same time.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. So this came out after the Bryan Cranston movie.
Okay.
But when Toho gave the license to Godzilla to the MonsterVerse, it came with the part of the contract was Toho couldn't make new Godzilla movies. And I believe it was just something with the production schedule that this one came out in 2016 and was either mostly or so. Right.
So
it
yeah,
came out in the middle. Yeah.
So yeah, well, I was going to say, if you saw the Roland Emmerich one, this seems to be like a reclamation of that, right? Or even the Godzilla versus Mothra and Mechagodzilla, all those other kind of materials. This one seems to be much more about Japanese people and the Japanese nation engaging in a problem that is legible to the Japanese people, right? That's recognizable. And so by having these kind of callbacks to the original, there's sort of an indication that's also manifest in the plot, which is, this is kind of like a Japanese story. This is about something that occurred in Japanese history that we're sort of exploring, albeit distance by virtue of a science fiction premise or a fantastical premise, whatever you want to call it, but still exploring something kind of traumatic that occurred in Japanese history, be it the bombs that dropped during World War II, or now the collapse of the nuclear site that harmed so many people, as well as the earthquake and tsunami. And it seems like that by signaling the older film, you're sort of recognizing a sort of shared historic trauma that is maybe unique to a people, right? And that you're able to then participate in it and signal that over or around the sort of American or maybe sillier iterations of the monster, be it, be it he's attacking the Brooklyn Bridge or fighting a metal version of him or whatever.
And I also liked it's a callback to everything you were just talking about, Tom, all these Japanese things. And what did they use to fight the monster? Very Japanese things, right? One of the first things they throw at the monster are the Shinkansen, the bullet train, armed with bombs. It doesn't work, but those are the Shinkansen. Yeah. There's another scene with all the major trains in Tokyo, all lined up, racing together towards the monster. And I forget exactly, but I think it's to knock him down so that they could take the skyscrapers that they're so proud of, that it is Tokyo. And that's what's going to collapse on the monster to hold him down. And then they're going to use the machines that they have used to build this city. They are going to take those machines, the cranes and the arms, and they're going to use that to inject the coagulation blood thing. So it was also very Japanese in what it was using. It was, look, yes, these terrible things happened in our past, but look at all these things we've done since then. And they celebrated with, throwing them at the giant monster.
I will tell you that one scene with all those cranes shooting the coagulant, I guess it's called. Just not, I was like, oh, this is Godzilla Goes to the Dentist. It kind of looked like he was and then he kills the first batch, and then they try it again. But that one scene actually, while it was innovative, I was like, that's kind of an odd scene.
Well, I think those machines are what were used to cool down Fukushima. So it was also a very direct.
Got it.
Those are literally what stopped the. What could
got
have
it.
been much worse than Chernobyl.
Sure, that makes sense with a little more context.
But yeah, no, it does. It's like I'm trying to think of a good dentist joke.
Look, Mom, no cavities.
Yeah, right. Have you been brushing, Godzilla?
I thought it was interesting that both movies, like the original Godzilla and this one, came out within a decade of the travesty that happened, that they kind of are using Godzilla as a metaphor for, like you said, with Fukushima, and even in this one, like calling back and even bringing up the possibility of an atomic bomb being used to get rid of Godzilla again. So like kind of paying tribute whatever to the original movie. And one thing I really kind of liked about it was so much of the classic Godzilla stuff, especially all the B movies we see, is them just like walking around destroying buildings and stuff. I'm like, it was kind of cool to have a reversal here and have the buildings like taking him down this time, like it was kind of a cool way to do that, because we always just see him knocking everything over. So I thought that was kind of a cool
revenge
thing.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, they bring up the bombs, right? And our female lead, I'm sorry, I forgot her name again. Kayako-san. She says she won't be here to see another bomb drop the way her grandmother had seen a bomb drop. So there is that, even direct reference to that kind of continuation of historical trauma, right? That this trauma is something even people have inherited.
Going back to the accident, they really did focus a lot on the radiation. Even as the monster travels through the city, he is emitting a certain amount of radiation. They did have to keep track of that. Also, when they were trying to originally shoot him, they said aim for the head and the legs, because they were afraid of nuclear type issues, from his guts and inside radioactivity. Not overly inundating us with, science mumbo jumbo, but enough to really ground it in a real world environment.
It's time for a bonus question. We're doing Price is Right rules, so closest without going over, and we're breaking the rules again, ladies and gentlemen. Twice in a row. The only 2 breaking rule questions that I've done. What number Godzilla movie was this? And I have no idea if we're counting the American ones, not counting the American ones, but I have a number.
You are counting American ones.
I'll lock in.
Which one this is, right? Not.
Yes.
Correct. What number is Shin Godzilla?
Locked in.
All right, Tom, what do you have?
7.
Just to review, Tom, we've talked about the original, the Bryan Cranston, the Matthew Broderick, Godzilla vs. Kong. This one, that's 5. So you think in addition to the 4 you've seen, there's 2 others.
Wait,
Ben?
I thought this came out after. Oh. Or, I mean, before Matthew.
That's true. Okay.
Wait. No, this was 2016.
When did that one?
Yeah. So it came out after Bryan Cranston, but before King of the Monsters and before Godzilla vs. Kong.
Okay, so this is after Bryan Cranston. Okay, no.
You want to go to 8?
Sure. I think I'm probably way off anyway, right?
Okay. Mm-hmm. Ben?
If I was doing real Price Right, I'd just go 1 over, but I was going to say 30, so I'm just going to stick with what I was going to say.
Ooh, and Ben takes it. The answer is 31 Godzilla movies.
Oh.
This is the 31st Godzilla movie.
Okay.
So,
man. Jesus. I had Godzilla, the sequel to Godzilla, the American Godzilla, Godzilla versus Megala Godzilla, Godzilla versus Kong.
Tom, you got a lot to go. I mean...
I already listed more than I guessed. Because I have.
All right, Ben. Well done. You are winning this episode. It's time for Movie Rent.
One thing that I found really interesting, which was kind of unusual is that the movie, while it has this incredible critique of bureaucracy, right? It sees bureaucracy as these cage that these people are trapped in. It doesn't have the same critique of governance. It seems to appreciate kind of good governance as something like that you can, if you can hack through the red tape, if you have the will to do that, then you could be kind of a leader, right? That you can come up. And so this movie does have actually a lot of faith in its governing structures. And it has their male lead is Yaguchi. It has a lot of faith in, somebody like Yaguchi rising up and being able to actually, once the kind of bureaucratic dead weight is literally killed in one scene, he's able to kind of come in and go, I'm sorry, no more committee meetings. This is how we're doing it. And what's interesting about that is there's this kind of tension between his authority and what's somewhat possibly formulated as a sort of democratic check on the powers of bureaucracy here, or what is maybe sponsoring the powers of bureaucracy, which at one point they're moving from one meeting room to another. And one of the characters says to Yaguchi, like, well, this is democracy, moving from one meeting to another. And which I thought was a really interesting comment, because you would never think of bureaucracy as being like a consequence of democracy, right? It seems almost to be the part of government which is outside of kind of democratic election. But it almost seems as if Yaguchi is able to kind of, through force of will and a little bit of talent or skill, able to, once everything is burnt away, kind of go, okay, I'm taking on the will of the people. I'm making the problem go away. I'm no longer calling these meetings. We're just going to do things. And the germ of this seems to be early on, when we have that one meeting where it's like nerds and weirdos and geeks and misfits and enemies to hierarchy. They actually, or enemies to bureaucracy. They actually say that in that one scene, that they all have to come together. And these are the people who figure things out, right? And they're the ones who come up with the cooling or heating method, however you want to call it. Because they're able to sort of exist in this kind of flat state where it's like anybody can talk. There's no seniority. There's no hierarchy. We're just going to come up with something. And then Yaguchi, now that he has the power to, because the bureaucracy has been killed away by Godzilla, he's able to just sort of jam that home, right? He's able to go like, okay, this is what we're doing. No more meetings. This is what we have to do. We have 3 days until the US blows us up. So now peril has required like a person of will to come forward and make it happen, regardless of democracy. That's really not a practicing interest anymore. Regardless of tradition or bureaucracy, we're just going to do that. And that seemed to be a really interesting tension. And the movie ends on a really kind of like hopeful note about the governing structures. Like, these things will survive and do better, that we can rebuild better. Well, I think if this was an American movie, you might see much more like all the politicians are bad, but the scrappy youngsters or whatnot are able to make it happen.
Yeah, because one thing Yaguchi never does is insult someone above him, even though he is in some ways a maverick to get things done. He always plays by the rules, right? He's not with the nerds until that nerd group is formed, and that's formed by the original bureaucracy. That wasn't a maverick thing it wasn't like, oh, we're gonna go start our own thing. The bureaucracy said, let's start a nerd group to get this done.
Yeah, but they only have effect once those people are gone.
Right. True.
Right. And once there's a threat that says, I'm sorry, we just don't have time for meetings anymore. Like, the way of doing things just doesn't work. And it's like, Yaguchi is the one who breaks the iron cage, if we're going to use that Weber metaphor for the system of power that's going on, right? He's the one who kind of goes, no, we're not doing meetings anymore. We don't have time. We're just doing this. And that doesn't mean he's breaking government or governing structures. He's just not doing the bureaucratic thing. And there's a faith in, like the Japanese people, quote unquote, whatever that means. But there's this kind of faith in that comes through in the end. Like, we're going to be able to do this and rebuild better.
Yeah, I think that's I mean, all excellent points, and it kind of ties into, you know, what the one thing I just want to talk about, which was like after the movie, was the fact that this won the Japanese Academy Award for best film. You know, like it was nominated for 11 things, it won 7, and I'm just like, the way that we would do, you know, kind of a kaiju movie or a big monster movie, like there's no way that it would be nominated for best picture or anything like that. But the way they handled it, I think, you know, justifies that win and everything. It's because of that storyline, and that story that they're telling makes so much more sense. Whereas here it would just be like, let's just blow stuff up, let's throw all our money at the effects and things like that. But that did catch me off guard when I was reading about it. I was like, wow, this won best picture at their Academy Awards. And I mean, I blame it at all. It's like, this is nothing that would have ever happened in America.
Yeah, that is interesting. That it was appreciated in that way. I guess maybe like recent history, Black Panther also got nominated for Best Picture, right? And that's sort of, I guess our Marvel movies are like their kaiju movies. Kaiju, you know, that there's a sort of equivalence there in terms of there's this genre that has this sort of action payoff, and usually we think that's it. You don't think so?
I think it'll be interesting to see Sheen Avengers,
Yeah.
right? These kind of feel like the older Godzilla movies, where maybe there's a point, maybe there's some social things going on in them, but maybe in, I don't know, what's time here, 50, 60 years, maybe 50, 60 years from now, we can use superheroes to represent a disaster or something that's more immediate. And
well, we kind of, I mean, you think of Alan Moore's work, right? Alan Moore does stuff like that. Now, you know, I don't think the Watchmen movie was on the level that this is. I think it's just kind of hard to watch. But you know, I guess I might be the only person on this podcast who feels that way. But you know, the certainly the comic books use that sort of, I guess, what you'd call kind of popular culture or pulp culture source to make something elevated or higher. And I think, you know, that's what this movie is using. It's using something kind of pulpy to do something more. And that isn't to say that the original Godzilla is somehow bereft of the ability to do complex things. You know, again, like Night of the Living Dead, right? Night of the Living Dead, or that original trilogy, I think is engaging in some kind of complex social commentary as well. They're not really very well made movies. And so I guess my point is kind of like pulp material really can become great, can become kind of great soil for really great work.
Yeah, and I think even with Black Panther, I think, isn't that when the Oscars tried that horrible idea of most popular movie? You know, like they threw out the different category, and it's like there's the backlash. Like it's either a great movie or it's not. You don't have to do popcorn films, and I think arguably Dark Knight is the reason that next year is when they switched to 10 best film. You know, because it wasn't even nominated that year. And then the next year, I think there's so much backlash. So like, okay, let's open it up to 10, so that, you know, if there is another great superhero pulpy whatever movie, we can get it in. And then, yeah, that Black Panther thing happened. But I agree. I just think for the most part, the way that we handle it in America, they don't necessarily qualify for that.
Expanding on that a little bit more, talking about Western audiences, there were two thoughts when I watched this film. The first one was, I wish I was fluent in Japanese, because I'm curious how I would enjoy it without having to speed read through subtitles over subtitles at a super fast pace, which maybe kept me very engaged because I had to, or I wouldn't be watching it. And the other part is, I think Western audiences are spoiled by special effects. So I don't know if it would have gotten the same acclaim here if it was released in our native language too, because again, the subtitles there is a language barrier there, but I don't know if that style would have resonated here. And I really don't think it would have.
I think the effects would need to be improved. I think if you're going to do a wide release for an American audience, you would need better CGI.
Better or a different style? Because I don't
a different right? style. If you're not sure,
that was a choice.
Think this was exactly what they wanted to make.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think this was, if they could do better CG, they would have changed. Because each of the Godzilla iterations was a Godzilla from the past.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, even the fish one.
I believe so. I believe that was.
Oh wow.
Yeah, I'm unfortunately not that well versed in in Godzilla, but
You
according
didn't
to
watch all
IMDb,
32 of the Toho
I
movies?
wanted to, but
You didn't watch all 8 of the
I
Godzilla
should have watched all 8, Tom.
8 have come up on the show.
Yeah, or a different style, whatever, maybe a little more conventional.
Which would have been a shame, because what I liked about the wide shots of Godzilla wasn't Godzilla, but it was the wide shot. It was these gorgeous views of Japan, right? That's part of what this movie is. It's Japan.
Sometimes I was put off by his look, and sometimes I thought it was perfect. Something with that tail always threw me off, whether it was just floating up there, and it just looked really weird. So I didn't know if it was supposed to have a mouth at the end of it. Although I will say, talking about the tail, that end shot, the true end shot where they focus in on the tail and you just see embedded corpses frozen into it. Wow. That was crazy. That was really...
Did anybody have any idea what that meant? It didn't seem to actually
Is that
fit.
reminiscent of like the it looked to me, now that this is maybe this is headcanon, but it looked to me a little bit like photographs of the H bombs, how we saw the imprints of people on remainders of buildings and whatnot. After those bombs, if you photographs from Hiroshima and Nagasaki, you could see kind of the outline or the imprint of a body.
You might be onto something there, Tom. And I think that might just be to say, we will move on, but the devastation was still here. You can't forget what happened. So you might be, I didn't think of it at this. I just thought it was like, whoa, like we have not seen like blood and okay, we saw blood coming out of his gills, but we didn't see people actually like getting harmed physically. Cities were destroyed. Probably people were crushed, but that's the first time we saw actual death and decomposition up close and personal, right as they end the movie.
Yeah, that was my reading. That it was a throwback to that, or not a throwback, God, a reference to that, an allusion to that.
I'd like to once again congratulate our winner of the week, which is Ben. Congrats, my friend.
Thank you very much.
You got us. Check out our website, talkingpicturestrivia.com, for more information about us and our episodes. You can find us wherever you listen to podcasts, as well as our YouTube channel. We are extremely grateful for any positive reviews, as those help others like you find us. If you like what you hear, remember to like and subscribe to our show. Who was your favorite Shin Godzilla bureaucrat and why? Let's continue the conversation on Twitter at Talking Studios. Have additional thoughts? Email us at talkingpicturestrivia@gmail.com or give us a call at 201-467-8679 for a chance to be featured on one of our future From the Listeners episodes. Thanks again, Ben, for joining us today. Where can people find you?
You can find me at Benny Burrito anywhere, Twitter, Instagram, whatever. And our podcast, 3 Films on a Podcast, we are at 3 Films Pod. We are recording an episode next week. It will be out in a while. Tom's coming on. We're talking about Close Encounters, and Tyler, one of our co-hosts, was on your guys' episode. So, that was awesome.
Yeah, no, we're having a lot of fun with you guys.
Come listen. It's a great show. This will be my second appearance, and I look forward to listening to it every week. So you guys should listen too. You can find me at Twitter at Thomas Lehman 15, and also come listen to Talking Pictures Trivia B-Side. It's our other podcast in which we jump into the films in a little more depth. Nick has joined us on B-Side recently with Star Wars Bad Batch episode.
Yes,
so
we're spinning off into TV as well because we can.
Yeah. So come listen to that podcast.
And you can find me on Twitter at KJ10001000.
I can also be found on Twitter at The Nicknamed. Join us next time as we start our summer series, Talking TV Trivia, where we'll be releasing shorter episodes based on the Disney Plus TV show, The Mandalorian. We'll be covering season 1, starting with the first episode next week. Ding, 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 ding.
It has this kind of social commentary, but it's also very melodramatic, right? It's like the person's tied to the railroad tracks. That's a thing that Daly invented.
Tom, can I tell you? So until Pat Gavin explained what melodramatic meant, I thought it meant it's something that's dramatic, but it's kind of mellow, so it's not that dramatic.
That's awesome.
I was so confused. Everyone's like, that's so melodramatic. I'm like, I don't know. That guy was kind of into this. Like, he was pretty extreme.
Moderately dramatic.
That's right,
is what you
exactly.
thought
This
that
was
Yeah.
insanely dramatic.
It was between dramatic and sleepy.
Yeah,
It was
kind of mellow.
melodramatic.
And I was like, yeah, I guess there is an art to that because you're not being dramatic, which is, a negative thing.